Something new is in the air, something strange, something unfathomable. It is true, but also something real. It is so real we stayed up last night and kept watch, at least those who attended the Easter Vigil. We kept vigil on account of it. It is so real, albeit difficult to fully fathom, that we engage in a multiplicity of symbolisms. Easter eggs, Easter bunnies in Europe and US, the peacock, ancient Christians, water, light, candles, and new fire from the Eastern and Western Christian churches. It is so real we Filipinos even engage in acts that border on the dramatic. In our penchant for reenactments, in our entertainment craze culture that prizes living tableaus, we even take resort to stage-like living presentation of what we consider so real as to affect life in concrete, as to affect our emotional state, as dictated by what we hold as true. In many places all over the country, the early dawn procession called the Salubong, that reenacts that supposed ecstatic moment of encounter between Mary and her risen Son, takes place today with all the pomp and pageantry possible within people's limited means. Indeed, what is more real than people hoping and believing that life in this world could still be better? What is more real than people ever expecting that despite all the death, decay, and destruction that take place in our terrorized world everywhere in the planet, people can still dream of waking up in order to smell the flowers? What is more real than people who, despite their jaded dreams, can still find meaning hidden behind such simple stuff like painted eggs, jumping bunnies, preening peacocks, and a huge lighted candle that waits down the aisle of a darkened church during Easter Vigil? On what is this reality based? What is behind such formidable hopes of peoples and nations? What explains this steadfast holding on to perpetual newness that even bombs, tsunamis, and terrorism cannot quell? Isn't this a case of what C.S. Lewis refers to as either based on lunacy or lies? In these post-9/11 times of digital images, identity-verifying iris scans, and redundant identity checks at airports all over the world, the painstaking search for evidences seems to be the name of the game. One is held suspect until proven otherwise. We live now by sight, not by faith. Specially trained people who man the X-ray machines examine every baggage, every satchel, every container, while personnel press and pat everyone who passes under metal and bomb detecting panels. The watchword nowadays, simply put, is to see is to believe. There is nothing like evidence that stands the test of sight, and one's word of honor may not be good enough anymore for those in charge of Homeland Security. If we go by this rule of sight that focuses on external evidence, our celebration last night or today may indeed be either born of lunacy or lies. The Matthean account read in the Vigil Mass is really no account at all in today's litigious and court trial craze culture. No one, not a single one, claims he saw Jesus rise from the dead. No, not even Mary of Magdala, who came early morning only to see an empty tomb, but people who follow the Lord and who were ready and willing to go and die with him, who narrated the Christian story from the very beginning, operate from a different perspective. They go not primarily by sight, but by faith. They base their account on something that went beyond sight, something that transcended material and physical evidence without throwing away such evidences altogether. Our Christian narrators and storytellers, beginning from the surprised women, the disciples, and all who saw and believed, were basing themselves on both sight and memory. For those who saw material events and evidences, the important watchword was very simply this: to believe is to see. Sight and memory. What was there in what disciples and loving followers of the risen Lord saw that told them that what they saw was real? What was there in what they saw and remembered that convinced them that indeed what they were seeing was not a ghost, but a risen body? It all boils down to the remembering and the doing that we all have been engaged in over these past 3 days. What have we done? For one, we have done the memorial of Him whose Pesach, transition, Passover from death to life, has brought heretofore unheard of meaning and promise to our existence as human beings created in God's image and likeness. We recall to mind and celebrated in our own lives the Passover, the Pesach of the Israelites of old, from slavery to freedom, from bondage to liberty, and our own crossing over from a life of sin to a life of grace. What absolute newness this brings about. Newness of life under the sway of the new law of Christ, Son and Savior. Newness brings about fresh readings to reality, the type of freshness that only poets who see beyond evidences can give expression to and write on. It is no wonder that this Christian story of Pesach spills over and finds expression in poetry, full as this story is of promise, of hope, of joy, and effusive gladness of heart. Mindful that the story of the resurrection of Christ is not just old wives' tale and telenovela material or gossip fare from snoopy women out for a morning stroll, John Updike writes in his 7 stanzas at Easter, "Let us not mock God with metaphor, analogy sidestepping transcendence, making of the event a parable, a sign painted in the faded credulity of earlier ages. Let us walk through the door. The stone is rolled back, not papier-mâché, not a stone in a story, but the vast rock of materiality that in the slow grinding of time will eclipse for each of us the wide light of day. And if we will have an angel at the tomb, make it a real angel. The Christian story of the Lord's resurrection that we celebrate to the full, born of sight and memory, does not come from lunacy or lies. It comes from the remembering and the doing in the context of celebration of God's own doing, His loving and saving act for us all, frail women and men, His beloved sons and daughters in and through Christ. He is our Pesach, our Passover, our transition from a life of sin to a life of grace. His coming brought meaning to human existence, the poetry of the life of believers who, because they believe, also see more than just a story but a promise of presence, a promise of real hopes, a promise that He will be with us until the end of days. A promise that in the poetic lines of Manly Hopkins, in a flash, at a trumpet crash, this Jack Joke poor potsherd will become in God's eyes what in God's eyes he is. Immortal diamond is immortal diamond. I end with the words of promise from another earlier poet, St. John Chrysostom. Christ is risen and you, O death, are annihilated. Christ is risen and the evil ones are cast down. Christ is risen and life is liberated. Christ is risen and the tomb is emptied of its dead. For Christ, having risen from the dead, is become the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. With poetry and promise like these, what need we fear? As we go through our own Pesach experience of life in the real world of pain and utter possibility. Happy Easter to one and all. This is your Kalakbay at Katoto saying thank you and God bless you.